What is a paradox mindset? Rothenberg called it Janusian thinking, being able to look in opposing sides simultaneously, which you can't really do, but you can get in a habit of moving quite quickly. He basically decided that he was going to pose the question, how could we double our profit and cut in half our environmental footprint in a decade? And it's probably not going to surprise you, Tom. People said, well, you can't do that. That's not how it works. The bigger you get, the more damage you do. And he said, no, we touch 2 billion consumers a day. We got to think about this differently.
Welcome to The Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, I'm excited to have Dr. Marianne Lewis on the podcast. Dr. Lewis is Dean and Professor of Management at the University of Cincinnati's Lindner College of Business. She's an internationally renowned scholar on organizational paradoxes and leadership tensions. Her research explores how leaders can effectively balance opposing forces like flexibility and structure or innovation and efficiency without losing momentum. This episode will provide actionable insights for anyone who finds themselves facing seemingly contradictory demands in leadership. Dr. Lewis, thank you for joining me today on The Science of Leadership.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, to get us started, Dr. Lewis, I was wondering, when we talk about paradoxes in leadership or otherwise, what are we really talking about?
In the most simplified way, we're talking about tensions. We're talking about the tug of wars that we face in our lives and our leadership in so many areas of our work. But it's taking tensions to a different place. So if you think about a traditional tension, say short-term, long-term, right? The higher up you get in the organization, that's a classic. Paradoxes are opposing, so you feel the tug of war, you feel the pull on opposing sides, but they're also interconnected. There's a synergy or connection between them that then makes them persistent. They don't go away. We might need to deal with an issue today, but we'll have to also deal with it tomorrow. So I'll use that short-term, long-term, which is really today and tomorrow. What we do today clearly influences the long-term or tomorrow, but also the way we're visioning for the future. Our long-term priorities impact the decisions and the very quick, even intuitive moves that we make in the short term. So in that way, rather than a trade-off or either or, we need to think about this more as a yin-yang, more of a paradox.
As you were talking there, I was reminded of a line from one of my favorite movies, Gladiator, with Russell Crowe. And at the beginning, the Romans are, fighting the Germanic horde, as it were. And he says to the soldiers, what we do today will echo in eternity. And so as you were talking about this idea of paradoxes, and it's what we do today, but it's also tomorrow, do you think if we're going to understand them, if we're going to master them, if you will, that we need to think about it more in that way? Like whatever we're doing right now is going to affect, eternity or not, the long term. And so we need to not think of it in a short sort of term mindset. Is that what you're saying?
It is what I'm saying. So my work, what I've found, and I don't think it's going to surprise you, is our default is to this either or trade-off approach. We, put the opposing sides of the rope on, we weigh the pros and cons, we make a choice and we move on. The problem is that's really limiting. One, are we really only limiting to the two choices? But the other is, as you do that, you tend to keep leaning toward your favorite side. So let me give you an example, because I'm being rather abstract here, but I'll give you one in the leadership realm that is a personal favorite. So Paul Polman was the CEO and chairman of Unilever. And I started working with Paul early because he's an alum of mine. And when he stepped into the role at Unilever, they were in a financial tailspin. So they had a big turnaround financially ahead of him. But he had also, he's very committed to sustainability. He's always believed in social responsibility. And he had this bigger vision. And so for him, one of the immediate tensions that he faced was between financial versus social responsibility, or some people have called this money or mission kind of sides.
Yeah.
And he decided he wasn't willing to make that trade-off, that there had to be a better way to work on this. And he said, he started to change the assumptions and the questions, and he basically decided that he was going to pose the question, how could we double our profit and cut in half our environmental footprint in a decade? And it's probably not going to surprise you, Tom. People said, well, you can't do that. That's not how it works. The bigger you get, the more damage you do. And he said, no, we've got to change that because we touch 2 billion consumers a day. We got to think about this differently.
Yeah.
All right. So, and I'm happy to kind of I can go on and explain how he did that because he is a very paradoxical thinker. But the reason I also want to put that out there is his example, because they achieved both profitability and sustainability at a level that most, especially at the multinational realm, would never have thought possible. But it's not that different to what Toyota was saying in the 1980s when they were saying that quality and cost are actually interdependent. They're two sides of the same coin. And the American auto manufacturers absolutely saw them as contradictory, either or trade-offs. And it bit us for a long time because the Toyota production system demonstrated, yeah, but you know what? The higher the quality, actually you start to lower costs because you have less rework, less waste, or all these things. Polman did the same thing with sustainability. He demonstrated that for every project we're asking, okay, how are we going to reduce packaging, waste, electricity, transportation? You're also reducing costs. And when you're selling a commodity, people have choices. And by doing the right things, you also get to have different types of consumers say, well, I have choices. So their market started to increase. Their sales started to increase as their costs started to decrease. Investors liked them too because of both of that. And now here you've got a virtuous cycle. That's what I'm talking about. When I get excited about paradoxes, it's a real shift in the way we think, and it pushes us.
Yeah. What is the psychology of this, of our tendency? You said we tend to gravitate to one more than the other. Right. What is the psychology that creates, because it seems like what you're kind of hinting at with Unilever, and we could talk about that with a host of other things, J&J with Tylenol and all that.
Oh yeah, there's so much.
But you're seeming to suggest that really they're not paradoxes per se, but we see them as that. And what is the psychology for that? Can you expound on that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of psychology behind this, but I'm going to go. Let me tell you. Let's start with the psychology of our default.
Sure.
This either or thinking is very psychological to start with, because there is a sense of comfort and control in being able to just weigh the pros and cons, make a decision, and move on. Right? There's this whole thing that we're doing in our minds about, okay, that seems very rational. The beauty of rationality is it feels, again, like a sense of control and that you can actually move on. The problem is you may have made a decision today, but you're going to have to make it again tomorrow, right? These aren't things that are going away. Actually, the one I would put out there as an example is work life. No matter where I end up talking about this with executives, that's probably the first or second that will come up. And you can't actually survive and thrive and work if you're not also re-energizing and taking care of your life. And obviously the work also funds the life. I mean, there's such a yin-yang there. But our psychology is to be this very kind of binary approach. The other piece to that, the psychology that I would just stress on that side is there's a double-edged sword to it, is we get very good at that default thinking and leaning towards one side, because actually the more, say in the example of work life, the more I lean into getting stuff done, knowing I build my expertise, I sharpen my focus, I build habits, I develop skills, then that's who I social with, my network starts to develop. Okay, all these things lead me in a particular direction in a very strong way that also builds my comfort. There's, the emotional side of it, and it limits, right? Cognitively, actually, my peripheral vision reduces. I get really good at seeing ahead of me. I get really poor at seeing to the sides, which is why I start to get some boundaries that are quite constraining. Those habits, while very positive and quick, this is kind of the Daniel Kahneman thinking fast and thinking slow, also get us into trouble. Because what did we miss when we just jumped? That social group and those interactions in the network, really powerful. And we don't know what or who we don't know. And that echo chamber becomes, you see what I'm doing? I'm kind of, I call that the rabbit hole, but we actually intensify in a vicious cycle. There's a whole psychology to that also then makes it hard to think paradoxically, because it's that you have to get comfortable in the discomfort of those tensions. Now, there's really good psychology, and I've had some fabulous co-authors that have helped us build out, for example, measures of what is a paradox mindset. Can you develop it? What does it look like? And so I'm happy to talk about that as well. But that actually challenges us to see that part of this vision is actually almost, Rothenberg called it Janusian thinking, being able to look in opposing sides simultaneously, which you can't really do, but you can get in a habit of moving quite quickly.
You've definitely piqued my interest with regard to the paradoxical thinking and that. So yeah, I would like to do that. I was just going to share, you were talking about basically how we can create tunnel vision versus seeing the periphery, and Dr. Richard Boyatzis was a guest on the podcast a few episodes back, and so he was talking about that, just this idea of how we can get tunnel vision and we lose innovation, because innovation is seeing outside of that tunnel. It's seeing those things on the periphery, and when we throw that away, the amount of things that we lose.
I think that's a really powerful example. And in fact, a lot of my early work was around the paradoxes of innovation, because incremental innovation, which is building from existing innovation, that tunnel vision does wonders for. It makes you very good at building upon what you've already have, right? Version 3.0 of the last product or whatever the case might be. But radical innovation absolutely takes a very different approach, which is, we call this ambidexterity. There's a whole literature around innovation and ambidexterity, and how do we train ourselves, but more likely our companies, our teams, our leadership style to recognize we need both. And how do we build, in some ways, a parallel structure as well as skills, because they are going to pull us in very different directions.
Yeah. Well, getting back to that idea of the paradoxical mindset that you touched on, I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. So we decided we really needed to lean into the psychology of this. So I love that you went there, because my work started really at a very macro level. How do organizations do this? So what does this look like in terms of structure, systems, high-level strategic leadership? And I have a wonderful co-author by the name of Ella Marone-Spector, who's at INSEAD, and she led a team of us, and she's very much a psychologist, to say, let's go to the micro level. How do you know that somebody has this capability, and what is it made of? And so we have a paper in the Academy of Management Journal that is being used now quite a bit. We've studied now thousands of people. But the paradox mindset is two dimensions. And the first is the ability to see tensions, which might sound really strange, Tom, but some people, either because you're avoiding them, or maybe there's something in our context, but some people just aren't as sensitized to them. I see them in my sleep, not always saying that's good, but are you aware of all the tug of wars that you're in? That's first. And then second, so you can kind of see a 2x2 here. The second piece is, what's your response? So is it an avoidance response? Let me move to the trade-off mentality, right? Let's figure this one out quickly so I can find my comfort zone again and move on. Or do I see this as an opportunity for learning, creativity, growth, innovation, some of the things you just said, right? So it's that 2x2 that's really powerful. And what we found in our work, again, just a very large study, is that people who experience high levels of tension, according to their supervisors, if they have a more paradoxical mindset, meaning if they lean into them, they see that creative friction as an opportunity, they are higher performers and more satisfied. They are also more productive. or more creative, yeah, more both innovative and productive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really powerful triumvirate if you think about those pieces. But now that's really pushed us to say, so how do you learn that?
Yeah.
Right? How do you develop that over time?
As you were saying that, it sounded really similar to me to Carol Dweck's work on growth
On growth
mindset.
mindset.
I mean, it seems, and so I was just wondering, have you or any of your colleagues worked on looking at how growth mindset versus fixed mindset comes together with this idea of paradoxical mindset?
We have. I mean, one of the things that we did for that paper was do what's called a nomenological net. So it was really looking at intersecting constructs. And Dweck's work is beautiful. And we saw what we would have expected to see, which is the more paradoxical your mindset, the more growth mindset.
Yeah.
But they're not the same thing, because a paradox mindset is very specifically about this idea that actually those tensions can fuel the growth. Mm-hmm. But what you would imagine is if you have a growth mindset, you're more likely to also lean into the tensions and look for opportunities to grow. So you're spot on. I mean, it's that connective tissue between those that we think is important.
Yeah, this idea that the tensions are a doorway to
yes.
growth and innovation development. It makes me really think about, wow, don't want to get into the medical. So I'm going to talk about the medical side of things a little bit, right? Yeah. But in medicine, what we have seen, and you're an academic, so you're familiar with U.S. News and World Report and how organizations bend and morph to try to look better within those, right? And so within medicine, this is a particularly insidious thing, especially in my field. So I'm a pediatric cardiologist. We take care of kids whose hearts are really abnormal when they're born. And so we work with surgeons to come up with ways to treat them and help them get better. And what may have been the zenith of our field was 20 years ago or even more, at a time when people could experiment and they could try new procedures and they could get better at them, and working with children who really had no hope otherwise. But now, with the way things work with rankings and this, that, and the other, hospitals don't want to get involved in those really complex patients, because if those patients don't make it, that is a bad mark on the hospital. So suddenly now you have these groups of kids that nobody or very few organizations want to try to help, because they're trying to maintain this image, right? And so whereas the tension is drawing them into this one area, and historically that tension was seen as, this is an opportunity to help these kids and to grow and get better diffusely. And so that's something I've written about that.
You know, it reminds me, I don't know if you've read any of Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety and failure. And she wrote the foreword to my last book. I think very highly of Amy and her work. And she talks often about the paradoxical nature of success and failure. I mean, that the way you get to the big successes is through failure. I mean, Elon Musk talks about this all the time, right? How fast can you do that? And it's a real challenge in medicine. I mean, this is kind of the black box thinking, and I just forgot the name of the author of Black Box Thinking, right? Comparing medicine to aircraft.
Is that Siad?
Yes, I think that, is that right?
I think,
but similar, right? And if we lean away from the experimentation and the failure, we'll slow the incredible progress we've had in medicine. Right. I know you know that, but that one just kind of, gets you in the heart. Just you're like, no. How are we going to have some protection for that work, because it's critical. That's the radical innovation side, right?
Right. And I think that my hope is that some of the systems we have in place will change so that it does promote that continued responsible, I don't want to say, like this,
absolutely,
Lone Ranger sort of Wild West kind of thing that did exist back in the 50s and 60s in our field, but responsible, thoughtful innovation with risk, because without risk, there we really don't
Mm-mm.
usually have very much reward.
No, absolutely. I mean, risk. I mean, you keep bringing up there are paradoxes everywhere. Risk reward is another good one. The other piece I was thinking as you said that, really one of the studies that sparked my interest. I mean, this was as a doctoral student many, many years ago. I was perusing the stacks. I feel for the doctoral students these days because you don't really do that anymore, and that's how some of these
Right. Yeah.
amazing things happen. Was by a fellow named Albert Rothenberg, and he was studying creative geniuses. And he read all their journals and letters, and he found this fascinating pattern, which is they saw tensions as paradoxes. They saw them as opportunities. So this was Mozart in Harmony and Discord. This was Picasso in Light and Dark, Virginia Woolf in Life and Death, and absolutely all the quantum physicists. The Tao of Physics is a phenomenal book about the paradoxes they saw with, our particles. Is it a particle or a wave, in motion or at rest? But what it brought them to the verge of madness at sometimes. But the point was, all of these contradictions actually ended up making richer opportunities, whether it was in the music or the art or the sciences. And that was one of my big aha moments of, wait a minute, there is something there. And in business, we are thinking far too linearly in a very complicated world.
Yeah. I was thinking about paradoxes sort of in preparation for our conversation here. And I thought that some of the greatest examples, at least that I can think of, can't come actually. And you said the paradoxes are all around us, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And so some of the longest standing ones, obviously, I guess, come from ancient works, So I was thinking about the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu. He had, that book is just full of them, but one like, a tree that is unbending is easily broken, sort of meaning if we're rigid, then we're brittle. And
Zen cones are all, but they were tools for learning too. They were to stretch your mind.
Yeah. And this idea that you said that with Dr. Edmondson's work, and I was actually just having a conversation with my son last night about this, because we were talking about, he had asked me about the imposter syndrome last week. He's a 17-year-old junior in high school trying to figure out where he's going to go in life. And so he was asking me about the imposter syndrome and was I familiar with it and all that. And so we were talking about that, and he asked me, had I ever suffered it, if you will?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought back, and I was like, I've worked with a lot of people who have, and I understand it. But I don't, and I had to be honest with him and say, I don't know that I really have. There have been times when I've struggled and I've failed and things, but I always felt like if I worked harder, I felt like I had the horsepower. I just needed to work harder to figure it out or whatever. And so went away from that conversation last week, and I was, why is it that I'm a weirdo like this? And so I start looking into it, right? And I talked to one of our psychology faculty in our department, and I said, hey, what's the association between a growth mindset and imposter syndrome? Because I've just recently started a PhD in educational leadership. I'm a legitimate lifelong learner. I'm always and I'm always telling my kids, failure is the doorway to success and this sort of stuff, right? And so I was talking to her about it, and then I think fundamentally one of the major reasons is that I've always had this mindset of I can grow, I can get better, I can do those hard things, and it's just a matter of working at it and growing. And so anyway, that was something that I came back to my son last night. I said, I don't know this is 100% correct, but this is my hypothesis as to why that is. But those paradoxes they're all over the place.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
As you look around our landscape right now in our country, do you see any paradoxes that really stick out to you right now, or ones that you might see kind of looming on in the near-term horizon? And I'm not trying to be political, because I try to keep the politics out of this podcast, but Any that you see?
Well, I absolutely do. I mean, we can go big macro. We could go. I mean, there are so many ways we could do this, but let's do go political, not in terms of the politics, but I think there's some really interesting paradoxes of polarization.
Okay,
Because
yeah.
when I think of the vicious cycles, which was a lot of my work studies, why we get stuck. And my finding is that we get stuck when we lean too far into the either or default. Either we get stuck because we go down this rabbit hole, we keep intensifying in one direction, one. The second vicious cycle is after we've dug down that rabbit hole, we actually overcorrect into and lose the great work that we did as we were digging and building depth. Say, you could do depth and breadth. You could do centralization, decentralization, work life, right? Suddenly I've just burnt out and now I'm sitting on an island. But did I really have to go that far, right? Extreme. And then the third is polarization. Or I think about that as trench warfare, which is really different sides digging in opposing directions. The reason why I bring that up, I mean, you asked about kind of the broader pieces, but it's fascinating to watch the vicious cycles. I wish it wasn't happening so egregiously in some cases. And again, not in any political, but one of the things that I've found in my work is that the either or is a real trap because it's so hard to break out of the assumptions that got us there. So, and I've studied organizations, say, for extensively in the past, for example, traps of success and failure. We can see both of those happening right now because we're polarized. So learning from failure is incredibly hard. Our natural psychological defense mechanisms kick in hard, and blaming everything external becomes an issue. I'm not saying everybody is doing that right now, but if you think on a political scale, it's remarkable how much of the postmortem or whatever they're calling it now is what did other people do wrong? Right? And a bunch of that finger pointing. If you look to kind of the Carol Dweck, that is not how we're going to learn.
Yeah.
It's just not, right? If you take no responsibility, there's zero chance. Now, the same kind of traps happen with success. And in fact, what we find with a host of organizational research is that one of the greatest long-term dangers is success. Is that when you've had a big success, you do the opposite. You actually lean into it is all my doing. Look at me, right? Yeah. It is a huge ego build. You start to rationalize it in this host of ways that says, look at what I have done, we have done. But again, missing that there's this whole other external, in the case we're talking politics, of 40 whatever percent that weren't, and making sure we have the humility to continue to learn and grow and avoid the complacency that is such a trap of success. One of the studies and I'm moving away from the politics here, that is an example I use so much is Lego. The Lego Corporation literally went to the brink of bankruptcy after 100 years of year-on-year growth. I mean, the absolute trap of success, completely isolated, not listening to anybody outside Bill in Denmark, even though you're a huge global firm by the time that this starts to happen. And when they start to realize that they're out of touch, right? They've got everything from Nintendo to, all sorts of things that they never thought would have been competing against the brick coming into play. They overcorrect. They move heaven and earth to get into radical innovation. Suddenly Lego isn't a thing, it's a brand, and it's an experience. They go all in, and pretty soon it doesn't mean much of anything. Efficiency's gone out the door. They've lost their core values, complete overcorrection. And in that time, they had a huge polarization between the old guard and the new guard. It was just, and I love the Lego example because they're one of the rare organizations that survived.
I was going to say, but they're still going.
They did. I know we still step on them and play with them, but yeah. And it was because they had some remarkable leaders who leaned into these tensions are how we're going to make this work in the longer term. I believe that about democracy. I believe that about higher education. There are a whole bunch of, rocks being thrown at various entities. And I think it's up to us to lean into what we're capable of doing in all of these forums to bring opposing perspectives together on very complicated, messy, dynamic phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we learn.
Yeah.
But we can do it collaboratively too.
I agree 100% on that. We can learn, we can do it collaboratively, and we can get better. I was wondering, this concretion that occurs, or ossification with success,
Mm-hmm.
the drivers of that is that we've been successful somewhere. There's a latent fear of failure, that I will be outed as not as great as I am, or is it, we know what we're doing, we're Kodak, we don't need to be digital,
You can think
we're
of so many
Blockbuster,
you name it. Right.
yeah, all these things. I mean,
Well, I mean, it's a number of things. I mean, we talked earlier about kind of psychology. There's absolutely cognitive elements at work, right? I mean, there are fascinating paradoxes. For example, that experts are, as a group, the greater your expertise, the harder to actually change, because you assume you know. It's just a cognitive limitation of those blinders. Now, you can learn very, very well in your area of expertise, but we tend to assume it can translate to places where it doesn't belong, right? And that we do a host of things there. So one, there's cognitive. Second, there's the emotional side, which is, as we get into that rut, whether it's a success rut or a failure rut, actually, and it sounds a little, morose or something on the negative side, but we actually find comfort because we at least know what to expect. There's a comfort in certainty, even when it's negative versus positive. So we get into this, a victim mentality is actually, there's a whole emotional element to that at least where it's us against them, or there's, a woe is us kind of experience. So there's cognitive, there's emotional, there's the habitual, which is more the routine and the inertia that is certainly on the individual. I mean, you're getting me on a roll here, but then we can institutionalize, and it's at a macro level, because now it's feeding into our systems and our structures and our networks. And all of these things build together, which is, to me, a lot of my work has been in that stuckness mode because it's vexing and fascinating. And the smartest people do it all the time, meaning get stuck.
Yeah.
And we got to figure out more creative ways to get back into the growth mindset. But there is something about that is, there is this odd, even perverse, reassuring nature to all of those pieces working together.
You just hit on something that I've just recently started a book, a 2005 book. You've probably read Janet Lipman Blumen's The Allure of Toxic Leaders. In it, she was writing about this fascinating phenomenon, a little morose, as you say, that people, even in the setting of having a toxic leader, will just stay with it because they know what they're getting, or whatever. It's perhaps the euphemism, the devil you know versus the devil you don't know, but it's an incredibly paradoxical, situation that happens, but we see it all throughout history and so forth, and it is bewildering. Anyway, so I'm hoping to learn more about that as I read through this book.
I thank you, and I don't know the book, and I think that's fascinating. I find that one of the interesting tensions that we have right now, that we're facing, I'm going back to kind of the big macro world that we're living in, is between kind of the pragmatic and the compassionate, right? Yeah. So, this is the socio-technical. There's been work for 100 plus years in a host of places around kind of these two ends of the spectrum. Like, okay, here are the policies, practices, system, right? Yes, you need those. You've got to have those to keep moving forward, right? Organizations know this. And then you've got this other side, which is compassion, culture. Here's our soft side. We know we need both of them. I think what's been fascinating to me as a country, and I was a dean in London when Brexit was happening, and you saw something a little bit similar on that side, is a strange polarization in a very, very complicated world of in issues between almost a pragmatic versus a compassionate. which makes no, why wouldn't those be the same? But sometimes
Yeah.
you don't feel like we're really being given a choice between, we do need to get things done. We need to fix things, and we can do so in a non-toxic, compassionate sort of world. But if you are forcing people to make a binary choice, and a vote is, you are actually, if you've decided that those are polarities, binaries, now you've got a problem, because people actually have to decide what matters most for them in their lives, which I respect, but I don't think it should be a binary.
Right.
And
It's
as
a
a
false
leader in
dilemma.
organizations, we see that all the time. I really early, as I was getting in to be a dean, I had this question of, do you have to be, I won't say the right word, or the word I use, but a jerk to be a really good leader? I was asking myself that, because you do sometimes to get things done, but I wasn't willing to do that culturally. And it started my move kind of into more the fervent leadership round, because I had been studying innovation and strategy and other things, realizing that the best leaders, they don't see these as opposites at all.
Right.
They see, if you want to get hard things done, you need to have a culture that people trust you, that you're doing it for a reason, and you care about them too. Right. And they go together as these two sides of the same coin. I love it. I mean, there are wonderful examples of leaders who get that.
Yeah.
Sometimes, though, we get lost in between.
The listeners know this, and they're probably tired of me talking about this book that is forthcoming, but I've been working on a project over the last 2.5 years where I interviewed 4-star generals and admirals, 51 of them, and then analyzed all that and put together all these leadership lessons and stuff. And they are phenomenal examples of this. And they would tell you, and anybody who's been in the military on any level really knows this, but Hollywood and society thinks of command and control and hard, leadership in the midst of a battle that things need to happen now. Let's don't discuss it. We got to do it right this instant. But it's developing that relationship over all the time leading up to that moment. It's investing in people and being a servant leader and those sorts of concepts that results in that moment of action where you can become that person who says, do X, and they trust you that you got the best interest of the mission and them in mind when you say do X. And so, I think that, as you say, we've got this in so many things, a false dilemma, as you were talking about.
It is. That's exactly
our nation, right? Is this, well, we got the pragmatic and we got stuff we got to get done, but we can't, and the other side, or we can worry about our citizens. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, but isn't the purpose of getting those things done, not that you were saying this, right? But as it seems our society is saying, we can either get things done or we can care about our people or some part of our people. Isn't the whole purpose, I mean, aren't those things really interdigitated?
Yeah.
So
and I love hearing about your project. I'll look forward to seeing that. I mean, I've always valued Angela Duckworth's book on grit, for example, passion and perseverance. And she was studying West Point, and I have a West Point son myself. And the more I've studied a variety, and I've worked with some interesting people like you have, you're right. Nobody follows you out of a foxhole because it was a command. There's a whole lot that goes into that, but they also have to trust the commands because they know that they work together. So, I mean, you're right. It is a perfect example of both sides of that coin. It takes enormous discipline and structure and practices, and it takes deep relationships and passion and care. And I do think people misrepresent or misunderstand what happens in organizations like the military, because it doesn't work without both.
Yeah. We kind of talked about different varieties of paradoxes and why being able to embrace those and see them in a different light is really important. Do you have any practical tips on how to handle paradoxes well, or maybe even ways that we can thrive in them?
Well, probably I would give you a couple simple ways to think about it. And my primary co-author, Wendy Smith, and I wrote a book recently called Both and Thinking, and go into some of this. So, I mean, there's a lot more in that one, but I'll give you kind of one of the ending tips is we think it's important to rethink what the outcomes of this decision-making process look like. And here's what I mean. I mean, with either or, it really is make a decision, move on.
Mm-hmm.
With both and thinking, we see two different versions. We see something we call creative integration and then consistent inconsistency. So here's what I mean by that. Creative integration, we use the analogy of a mule, smarter than a donkey, stronger than a horse, right? So sometimes you get this beautiful synergistic opportunity that you can make the most of alternative sides, right? We can have that leadership moment that is all about discipline and drive with the most outstanding caring team together, right? And mules are sterile. So they're one-offs. They don't happen all the time. When they happen, you should absolutely celebrate. Paul Polman, Unilever figured out this creative sachet that use less packaging and water and all these, and sold like crazy. It was a mule.
Mm-hmm.
It's fantastic. And they don't have baby mules. So you have to kind of keep thinking on. The other way is consistent inconsistency. It's the one I talk about the most, especially with rising young leaders, because I use the analogy of tightrope walking. Tightrope walking is actually micro shifts left and right, but moving towards an end goal. That is incredibly important because there will be times where you have to be tough and times where you have to be compassionate. And you can't go too far. You have to figure out some principle-based guardrails that keep you moving forward. But in our approach, one thing that helps us get unstuck is to stop putting so much weight in there is a be-all, end-all final solution. Because if it is any sort of a real issue, it's going to keep coming up. And we've got to get good at both creative integration, the win-wins, and some very skilled tightrope walking. That's how life actually works.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing those. Those are great practical ways to think about this. And I think we've touched on, this is a really great topic, and I gotta be honest, I'm disappointed that I've got, sort of this time limit that we set on our episodes, because this is really fascinating stuff to talk about. And
I'd be really interested in hearing more of where you see them in medicine and other places. So thank you for piquing my curiosity as well.
Well, I'll tell you, they are all over the place in medicine, in academic medicine. You're in academics as well. They're everywhere. So yes, and I think this is a really helpful topic for the listeners. And so I really appreciate you. It's been an honor to have you on The Science of Leadership, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.